I am Joshua, 27 years old, and my parents announced to 300 people that I was completely useless. Before I tell you about how I got the ultimate revenge by saving the very brother they ruined, let me know where you are watching from in the comments. It was exactly 9:47 p.m. on a freezing Tuesday in February. I was standing in the kitchen of my Cambridge apartment, waiting for the kettle to boil. The apartment was quiet, the kind of deep, comforting silence that you only truly appreciate when you have spent your entire life surrounded by emotional noise. This was my sanctuary. I had bought the espresso machine on the counter with my own money. I had picked out the gray sofa in the living room. Everything in this space belonged to me, and no one from my past had the address. Then, my phone buzzed against the granite countertop. The screen lit up, cutting through the dim lighting of the kitchen. It was an unknown number, but the area code was local 617, the Boston area. My first thought was that it was a work emergency. As a senior clinical research coordinator at the hospital, late-night calls about patient data or trial protocols were not entirely uncommon. I swiped to answer and pressed the phone to my ear. "Hello," I said, my voice slipping into its professional, neutral register. Silence hung on the line. It was not a dead connection. I could hear the faint, ragged sound of someone breathing. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. Joshua, 2 syllables. That was all it took for the carefully constructed fortress of my adult life to shudder. It was a voice I had not heard in 6 years, 8 months, and 24 days. It was my mother. My heart slammed against my ribs so hard it physically hurt. I froze, my hand gripping the phone. My eyes locked blindly on the blue flame of the gas stove. My thumb hovered over the red end call button. I should have pressed it. I had spent years in therapy learning how to press it. But a dark, morbid curiosity kept my hand perfectly still. "How did you get this number?" I asked. My voice was completely flat, drained of any emotion she could possibly use against me. I looked it up online, paid a background check service," she stammered. Her voice sounded thin, shaky, and older. It was entirely stripped of the arrogant, polished authority I remembered from my childhood. "Please, Joshua, do not hang up. You have 10 seconds, I said, leaning against the counter to steady my trembling legs. "It is about Caleb," she blurted out, her voice cracking. "He is not well. Joshua, we need you." My jaw tightened so hard my teeth ached. A familiar, suffocating heat rose in my chest. "You need me? After 7 years of absolute, dead silence. You need me? I know it has been a long time. I know," she sobbed. It was a wet, desperate sound. "But your brother is in trouble. Real trouble. He lost his consulting job months ago. He stopped leaving his apartment. We had to move him back into the house last week. Joshua, we found things. Empty pill bottles. Needles. He is sick, and he will not let us help him. He just screams at us to get out. Maybe he will listen to you." I let out a harsh, bitter laugh that echoed off the kitchen tiles. It sounded like scraping metal. "Why in the world would he listen to me? You made sure he knew I was a complete waste of space. You made sure the whole world knew I was useless. Remember," she gasped, a sharp intake of air. "Joshua, that is not fair. That was a long time ago." "What is not fair?" I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "Is you calling me after 7 years of pretending I am dead, just because you need someone to clean up your mess?" I pulled the phone away from my ear and pressed the red button. I tossed the phone onto the counter and gripped the edge of the sink, breathing heavily. 10 minutes later, the screen lit up again. A text message. "Come home. Your brother has nothing left. We are begging you. Please." I stared at those glowing words until they blurred. To understand why I reacted so coldly to a mother begging for her son's life, to understand why my first instinct was to leave them to burn, you have to understand what happened 7 years ago. You have to understand the day I ceased to exist in their eyes, the day they murdered whatever love I had left for them in front of a live audience. Let me take you back to May 18, 2018. The air in the Boston University auditorium was thick, It smelled like aerosol hairspray, cheap floral bouquets, and the nervous sweat of thousands of people packed into folding chairs. It was Caleb's college graduation day. He had done it perfectly, of course. 4 years, Dean's List every single semester, a prestigious job offer waiting for him at a top consulting firm. He was the golden boy, the pride of the Kastner family legacy, ready to conquer the world. I was 20 years old, finishing my sophomore year at the same university. I had bought a cheap, navy blue suit from a thrift store 2 days prior, just to look presentable for the photos I knew I wouldn't be included in. The collar scratched my neck, and the sleeves were half an inch too short. My parents had spent nearly $500 on Caleb's custom graduation outfit, and had already made reservations at a high-end steakhouse in Chestnut Hill for a celebration dinner. When we left the house that morning, no one asked if I needed a ride. My father drove his pristine sedan. My mother sat in the passenger seat adjusting her makeup, and Caleb sat in the back. I drove my beat-up Honda Civic alone, fighting for parking, and walked into the arena by myself. When I found my parents, my father handed me a single ticket. Row M, seat 14. 12 rows behind the 4 VIP seats they had secured for themselves in row C. I sat surrounded by strangers, staring at the backs of my parents' heads. They did not turn around to look for me once. The ceremony dragged on with endless speeches about bright futures and changing the world. Finally, they announced the parent tributes. The university had selected 5 families to come up on stage and speak about their graduating child. It was supposed to be a heartwarming tradition. My parents walked up the wooden steps to the stage. They looked like they belonged on a billboard for the perfect American family. My father, with his salt and pepper hair and tailored suit, adjusted his tie. My mother smoothed her expensive designer skirt, beaming under the bright stage lights. My father tapped the microphone. A sharp squeal of feedback echoed through the massive room, and the audience of 300 people quieted down. Caleb has always been extraordinary. My father's voice boomed through the massive speakers, dripping with absolute pride. From the very day he was born, we knew he was destined for something special. He is smart, he is fiercely driven, and he is the perfect son. He paused perfectly, soaking in the admiring looks from the crowd. He looked down at my mother, sharing a warm smile, and then flashed a charismatic grin to the audience. He leaned right into the microphone. Honestly, he said, his voice crystal clear, we should have stopped after him. A few scattered, uncertain chuckles rippled through the front rows. People thought he was building up to a punchline. He leaned closer to the mic, his grin widening. Our second child is entirely useless. The room erupted. 300 people roared with laughter. Fathers slapped their knees. Mothers wiped tears of mirth from their eyes. The sound hit me like a physical wave of force, pinning me to my cheap plastic chair. My mother leaned into the microphone, her smile bright and unapologetic. Well, she chimed in, her voice ringing out over the laughter. At least one of them makes us proud. More applause, more roaring laughter. My father waved to the crowd like a comedian walking off the stage of a late-night show. And Caleb? I looked desperately at the stage. Caleb stood there in his pristine cap and gown, laughing playfully. He was shaking his head, pointing at my dad as if to say, "Oh, Dad, you're so crazy." He did not scan the crowd to see if I was okay. He did not step up to the mic to defend me. He just soaked up the spotlight. I sat in row M. My vision tunneled until all I could see were the bright lights above the stage. My ears rang with a high-pitched whine that drowned out the applause. I could not breathe. It felt like someone had driven a stake through my chest. The ceremony continued. Someone else walked up to speak, but I was already gone. I stood up. My legs shook violently, but I forced myself to walk. I walked down the aisle, pushed open the heavy double doors, and stepped out into the blinding sunlight of the parking lot. I did not stop until I reached my car. 10 minutes later, I heard the crunch of footsteps on the asphalt. I turned around. My mother was speed-walking toward me, her heels clicking aggressively. My father and Caleb were a few steps behind her. She did not look apologetic. She looked incredibly annoyed. "There you are," she snapped, slightly out of breath. "We were looking all over for you. The dinner reservation is in an hour." I stared at her, my throat tight with unshed tears. "You humiliated me, in front of hundreds of people." My father let out a loud, exasperated sigh. He adjusted his expensive watch. "Oh, come on, Joshua. It was a joke. Lighten up. You are always so incredibly sensitive. You ruin every family event with this attitude." I looked past him, locking eyes with my brother, the golden boy. "Caleb?" I pleaded, my voice cracking. "They just told a room full of people that I shouldn't exist." Caleb shifted his weight, looking down at his shiny dress shoes. "Dad's jokes are a lot, Josh. But come on, man. You know how they are. They didn't mean it like that. Just let it go so we can go eat." He chose them. He chose the comfort of his position over the reality of my pain. "I am not going to dinner," I said, my voice eerily calm. "Suit yourself." My father shrugged coldly. "We will see you at home." They turned around and walked away. They did not look back. I got into my car, locked the doors, and drove away. I drove straight back to my dorm room, packed my bags, and walked out of their lives. Growing up in the Kastner household was like living in a high-end museum where you were constantly reminded that you were not allowed to touch the exhibits, and worse, that you did not belong in the gallery at all. We lived on Maple Street in Newton, Massachusetts. It was a massive white colonial house with perfect black shutters and a lawn so meticulously manicured it looked like artificial turf. My father, Richard, was a senior partner at an accounting firm. My mother, Diane, was an elementary school principal. From the outside, looking in through our spotless bay windows, we were the picture-perfect American dream. Inside, we were a brutal, unforgiving hierarchy. Caleb was born in 1996. I was born in 1998, 2 years apart in age, but a vast, unbridgeable ocean of difference in how we were valued. Caleb was the golden child. He made the dean's list every single semester. He was the captain of the high school debate team, the star tennis player, the kid who brought home trophies that my father proudly polished and displayed on the custom-built mahogany mantel in the living room. Caleb was going places. I, on the other hand, was just the kid who showed up. I kept my head down. I maintained a 3.4 GPA, which in a normal family would be something to be proud of. But in a house where absolute perfection was the baseline expectation, a 3.4 made me an embarrassing failure. The house itself reflected our respective worth in glaring, physical detail. Caleb's bedroom was the second master suite. It was massive, measuring 16 by 18 feet. When he was a junior in high school, my parents completely remodeled it for him. They painted the walls a calming sage green, bought him a queen-sized bed from Pottery Barn, and installed a custom oak desk that cost nearly $1,000, so he would have proper space to study for his SATs. Natural light flooded his room from 2 large windows overlooking the street. My room was tucked away at the very end of the second-floor hallway. It was 9 by 10 feet. I slept on a squeaky twin bed I had owned since I was 8 years old. The paint on my walls had been chipping since middle school. My desk was a flimsy, particle board piece of junk we found at a yard sale. One year, right before my sophomore year of high school, my laptop and textbooks barely fit on the tiny desk surface. I walked downstairs to the kitchen where my mother was sipping her morning coffee and reviewing school reports. "Mom," I asked quietly, "do you think I could get a bigger desk? I don't have enough room to do my biology homework." She sighed heavily, slamming her pen down on the marble counter. She didn't even look up at me. "Joshua, we just spent a fortune redecorating Caleb's room. You will just have to make do. Don't be selfish." Making do became my entire personality. I learned to make myself small. I learned to be invisible, walking softly on the hardwood floors, so I wouldn't interrupt my father's evening phone calls. But the most painful battleground was the dining room table. Dinner was served at 6:30 p.m. sharp, every single night. The seating arrangement never changed. My father sat at the head of the table. Caleb sat immediately to his right, the place of absolute honor. I sat at the far end of the table, closest to the swinging kitchen door. Close enough to be useful when someone needed a refill of water, but far enough away to be entirely forgotten in the conversation. My father would slice into his steak with surgical precision, turn to his right and smile. "Caleb, tell us about the student council meeting. That's my boy. Leadership runs in our blood, you know?" They would talk for 20 minutes about Caleb's achievements, his friends, his prospects. Then, my father would glance down the length of the table at me, as if suddenly remembering I lived there. "And Joshua, what class are you struggling to pass this week?" "I am not struggling, Dad. I got a B+ on my history paper," I would say, staring at my plate. "A B+, right? Well, try to apply yourself more. We can't all be geniuses, but you could at least put in the effort your brother does." I stopped trying to defend myself after my freshman year. Instead, I started counting. I literally kept a small, black notebook hidden under the mattress of my twin bed. I kept a tally. Between my freshman year of high school and the day I walked out of that graduation auditorium, I counted exactly 52 times they asked me, "Why can't you be more like your brother?" 52 times they explicitly told me I was the wrong version of a son. The true breaking point, the moment that solidified the financial and emotional divide between us, came in April 2016. It was the day the college acceptance letters arrived in the mail. Caleb had opened his letters at the kitchen table a few days prior. He had been accepted into a prestigious private university with a massive merit scholarship. My mother had literally popped a bottle of expensive champagne at 3 in the afternoon. My father had immediately called the country club to boast to his golf buddies. When my letters arrived, I sat at the same kitchen table. I had applied to state schools, knowing my grades wouldn't secure massive grants. I opened the envelope from my top choice. I was accepted. I smiled, a rare feeling of genuine pride washing over me. I looked up at my father, who was reading the Wall Street Journal on his tablet. "Dad, I got in," I said, sliding the letter across the table. He barely glanced at the crisp white paper. "State school. That is nice, Joshua. You had better start looking for summer jobs immediately." I frowned, pulling the letter back. "I am going to work, but the tuition is still pretty high. I saw the statements for the college fund you guys set up. Since Caleb got that huge scholarship, is there any way I could use a portion of the college fund to help cover my first year?" The kitchen went dead silent. My father slowly lowered his tablet. He looked at me as if I had just asked him to burn the house down. "The college fund," my father said, emphasizing every syllable, "was built for Caleb. He earned his way into a top-tier school. He earned that money by being excellent. You expect us to drain his resources to subsidize mediocrity. I just need help with the first year," I pleaded, my face burning with humiliation. "I am your son, too." My mother finally chimed in from the sink. "Joshua, you have to learn responsibility. Caleb earned his path. You need to figure your own life out. Taking out some loans will build your character." They had hundreds of thousands of dollars sitting in an account. They paid for Caleb's tuition, his luxury off-campus apartment, his groceries, his car insurance, and his weekend ski trips. Caleb graduated 4 years later without a single dime of debt to his name. I, on the other hand, was forced to figure it out. By the time I was 18, I was chained to high-interest federal student loans that felt like an anchor around my neck. I worked 2 jobs during my entire freshman year of college. On weekends, I worked at a local hardware store, hauling bags of mulch and mixing paint until my arms went numb. On weeknights, I worked in the campus dining hall, wiping down sticky tables and smelling like stale grease until midnight. I skipped meals to save money. I pirated my textbooks as PDFs because I couldn't afford the access codes. All of this history was playing in a rapid loop in my head as I sat in my Cambridge apartment in 2025, staring at the desperate text message from my mother. "Come home. Your brother has nothing left." When I drove away from the auditorium in 2018, I had exactly $847 in my checking account. My cousin Jessica had been the only family member to text me that night. She had been in the audience. She wrote, "Are you okay?" What Uncle Richard said was horrific. "I am so sorry." I replied to her, "I am fine. I am done with them." I spent that night blocking my parents on my phone, my email, and every social media platform. I blocked Caleb. I blocked the aunts and uncles who had laughed at me. I sat in the dark of my tiny dorm room, listening to the hum of the mini fridge, and made a blood oath to myself. I promised myself I would build a life so incredibly solid, so financially and emotionally untouchable, that they could never make me feel small again. I would never ask them for $1. I would never ask them for a favor. I would become completely bulletproof. And now, 7 years later, the people who told the world I was useless were begging me to save the son who had everything. The next 4 years of my life were a brutal, uncompromising test of sheer survival. The anger I felt toward my parents burned hot in my chest, and I used it as fuel, but anger does not pay the electric bill. Anger does not buy groceries. I had cut the cord, which meant there was no safety net beneath me. If I fell, I would hit the concrete. During my junior year of college, I took on a third job. Alongside the hardware store and the dining hall, I started tutoring high school kids in biology online from midnight until 2 in the morning. I charged $25 an hour. I slept maybe 4 or 5 hours a night. I drank so much cheap, burnt coffee from the library vending machines that my hands would literally shake during my morning lectures. I lost 10 pounds I couldn't afford to lose. My cheekbones hollowed out. I looked like a ghost haunting the campus, but I kept my grades up. My GPA climbed to a 3.6. I was proving them wrong one agonizing day at a time. Then, the spring of 2020 arrived, and the pandemic shut the world down. Campus closed entirely. Students were told to evacuate the dorms and go home to their families. I watched my classmates pack their cars, hugging their parents in the parking lots, tears of relief in their eyes. I had nowhere to go. There was no childhood bedroom waiting for me. I scrambled and found a cheap, cramped sublet in Allston, splitting a $1,800 monthly rent with 2 complete strangers. I finished my senior year of college staring at a glowing laptop screen in a room that smelled faintly of old carpet and bleach. Graduation day in May 2020 was a surreal, lonely affair. There was no grand auditorium this time. There was no stage, no audience, no microphone for my father to use as a weapon. I sat on the edge of my mattress, wearing a faded gray t-shirt and sweatpants, and listened to the university president speak through my tinny laptop speakers. When my name, Joshua Kastner, Bachelor of Science in Biology, cum laude, flashed briefly on the screen, pre-recorded applause played over the broadcast. I sat in the silence of my room and clapped for myself. Once, twice. Then I closed the laptop, put on my uniform, and walked to the grocery store to start an 8-hour shift stocking shelves. Nobody called to congratulate me. Nobody sent a card with a check tucked inside. I was entirely, fundamentally alone in the world. But as I arranged cans of soup on aisle 4, a strange sense of peace washed over me. I had survived. I was free. Things slowly began to change after graduation. Hard work eventually demands a payoff. One of my professors, Dr. Ellen Strauss, had noticed my obsessive dedication in her research lab during my senior year. When the world started opening back up, she pulled some strings and recommended me for an entry-level research assistant position at Massachusetts General Hospital in the neurology department. When I got the offer letter, I cried in my car. The starting salary was $42,000 a year. To someone who grew up with my parents' wealth, it was pennies. But to me, looking at my first paycheck after taxes, $1, $2.26 every 2 weeks, I felt like the richest man on earth. It was mine. It was clean money. I moved out of the miserable sublet and rented a tiny studio apartment of my own. I furnished it entirely with items I found on Craigslist and Facebook Marketplace. I started chipping away aggressively at the mountain of student loans. I worked overtime whenever they offered it. By 2024, my relentless drive paid off again. I earned a major promotion. I became a senior clinical research coordinator, overseeing multiple trials. My salary jumped to $68,000. It allowed me to move into the nice apartment in Cambridge. I finally bought a real couch that hadn't been slept on by strangers. I built a life. I also built a new family. I became incredibly close with Gabrielle and Amit, two co-workers who also knew what it meant to struggle and build a life from scratch. We celebrated Thanksgiving together in my apartment, eating store-bought turkey and drinking cheap wine. We were the family we chose for ourselves. But despite the career success, the internal wreckage my parents had caused was still severely impacting my life. I realized this when I tried to date. I met a guy named Ethan. He was an architect, kind, intelligent, and incredibly patient. We dated for about 6 months. He would cook dinner for me, ask about my day, and try to genuinely connect. But every time he asked about my childhood, every time he tried to get close to the core of who I was, I slammed the iron gates shut. One night, after a quiet dinner, Ethan looked at me with deep sadness in his eyes. "You're impossible to reach, Josh," he said softly. "You treat this relationship like a hostile negotiation. You're always waiting for me to turn on you. I can't compete with the ghosts you're fighting." We broke up a week later. It destroyed me, but he was completely right. I had survived my family, but I had not healed from them. I had built a massive fortress to keep my parents out, but I was dying of starvation on the inside. That was when I started therapy. I found Dr. Ramos, a trauma specialist in the city. Twice a month, for a year, I sat on her beige couch and unraveled the tangled mess of my childhood. "You survived them, Joshua," Dr. Ramos told me during a particularly grueling session, passing me a box of tissues. "But survival mode is not living. You have defined your entire adult existence by your opposition to them. As long as you are terrified of them, they still control you." She was right, and that was why, on that freezing February night in 2025, when I stared at my mother's text message begging me to come home, I didn't just block the number. "Come home. Your brother has nothing left." I sat on my couch, the glow of the phone illuminating the dark room. I owed them absolutely nothing. They didn't pay for my education. They didn't protect me. They threw me to the wolves. I could delete the text, go to sleep, and go to work the next day as if nothing happened. But if I ignored them, I was still running. I was still the scared 20-year-old kid running away from the auditorium in a cheap suit. If I went back, faced them on my own terms, and walked away from a position of power, maybe I could finally kill the ghosts. I picked up my phone and started typing. My hands were perfectly steady. "I will come tomorrow at 2 p.m., I texted back. "But I am not doing this for you. I am coming for Caleb. And I have rules. If you break a single one, I turn around and leave forever." I sent a list of 10 absolute boundaries. "I will not stay overnight. I will not eat a meal in your house. I will not accept any fake, crying apologies about the past. I will not be yelled at or guilt-tripped. I am only coming to assess Caleb's situation. You will not ask me for money," and so on. My phone buzzed almost immediately. My mother's reply was desperate and submissive. "Understood. We agree to everything. Thank you, Joshua. Thank you." I turned off my phone and threw it onto the cushion beside me. I didn't sleep a single minute that night. I packed absolutely nothing in my car the next morning. I was walking straight back into the lion's den, but this time I wasn't the prey. The drive from Cambridge to Newton was exactly 11.2 miles, but crossing the city limits felt like driving through a time portal back into a nightmare. I kept the radio off. The silence in my sedan was deafening. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles ached. Every familiar landmark, the local bakery, the park where I used to hide to avoid going home, the grand oak trees lining the streets, triggered a sharp, painful memory. At exactly 1:58 p.m., I pulled onto Maple Street. The Kastner house loomed ahead. It looked completely untouched by time. The white colonial siding was freshly power-washed. The black shutters gleamed. The lawn was still that aggressive, unnatural shade of green. It was a museum frozen in time, desperate to maintain its flawless facade to the neighborhood. But the facade cracked the second I looked at the driveway. Parked aggressively near the front steps was a brand-new, slate-gray Porsche 911, my father's latest toy. It caught the harsh winter sun, reflecting an obnoxious display of wealth. It was a glaring, shiny metal distraction from the absolute rot festering inside the house. They had a son dying in an upstairs bedroom, but Richard Kastner made sure he still drove a Porsche to the country club. I parked my modest Honda Civic on the street, tightly against the curb. I refused to let my tires touch their pristine driveway. I killed the engine, took one massive, grounding breath, and walked up the stone pathway. Before I could even raise my fist to knock on the heavy oak door, it swung open. My mother, Diane, stood in the threshold. The sight of her sent a jolt of shock through my system. In my memories, she was 10 feet tall, imposing, and impeccably dressed. The woman standing before me looked shrunken. Her dyed blonde hair was dull and thinning at the roots. The stress had carved deep, permanent ravines around her mouth and eyes. She was wearing a baggy cashmere sweater that hung loosely on her frame. She took a step forward, her eyes welling with tears, and reached out her arms to embrace me. I instantly took a sharp step back, my posture rigid. I put a hand up, palm facing her. Boundary number 3. No physical contact, no fake apologies. Her arms dropped to her sides like lead weights. She swallowed hard, her chin trembling. Joshua, you look so good. You grew up. I am 27, Diane, I said, my voice cold and clinical. I didn't call her mom. Where is he? I stepped past her, crossing the threshold into the foyer. The house smelled exactly the same. A cloying mix of expensive vanilla candles and lemon floor wax. It was the scent of my childhood anxiety. Everything was perfectly in its place. Not a speck of dust on the credenza. I glanced into the formal living room. Above the grand fireplace, sitting on the custom mahogany mantel, were 6 framed silver photographs. I scanned them quickly. Caleb graduating. Caleb holding a tennis trophy. Caleb and my parents smiling on a vacation in Aspen. 0 photos of me. Not a single trace of my existence had been allowed to tarnish their curated display. They had erased me completely. My father walked out of the kitchen, holding a crystal glass of sparkling water. He wore a crisp, ironed button-down shirt and dress slacks. He looked as sharp and arrogant as ever, refusing to let the crisis wrinkle his clothes. Joshua, he said, his voice carrying that familiar tone of forced authority. Let us sit down in the living room first. We need to brief you on the situation. I am not here for a corporate briefing or a family meeting, I said, remaining standing in the hallway. I am here to see Caleb. Where is his room? He is upstairs. In the master suite, my father said, gesturing to the beige leather sofa. But you cannot just barge in there. Sit down. We need to talk before you see him. I stood my ground, leaning casually against the doorframe, my arms crossed over my chest. I stared at him, unblinking. Talk. My father sighed heavily, running a hand through his salt and pepper hair. He took a seat in his leather armchair, crossing one leg over the other, looking exactly like a lawyer preparing to defend a deeply guilty client. Caleb has had a minor setback. My father began, choosing his words with agonizing care to minimize the damage. He was in a minor car accident 2 years ago, rear-ended on the highway, hurt his lower back. The doctors prescribed him some painkillers, oxycodone. He took them for the pain, but he struggled to transition off them. He is a drug addict, I said bluntly. I didn't flinch. My mother gasped, dropping onto the edge of the sofa. Joshua, please, do not use that ugly word. He is in severe pain. It is a medical issue. If he is shooting up or popping pills he buys off the street, he is an addict. What do you want me to call it? A hobby? I asked coldly. My father's face flushed an angry red. He lost his consulting job at the firm in December. They let him go due to erratic behavior. He stopped paying the rent on his luxury apartment in Back Bay. We had to pack up his things and move him back here 2 weeks ago. but he refuses to leave his room. He won't shower. He won't eat with us. He screams at your mother and throws things at the walls. And you thought calling the useless son you publicly disowned would miraculously fix him? I asked, raising an eyebrow. The tension in the living room became suffocating. It felt thicker than a bitter divorce settlement negotiation. My father stood up, gripping his glass of water tightly. We made a joke in poor taste 7 years ago, Joshua. You need to let that go. You hold onto these grudges like a child. We are dealing with a life-or-death crisis right now, and you are being petulant. I pushed off the doorframe and took 2 steps into the living room, closing the distance between us. You humiliated me in front of 300 people. I fired back, my voice dangerously low and steady. You cut me off financially and emotionally. You forced me to take out high-interest loans and work 3 jobs while you padded his bank account and bought him a life on a silver platter. Do not stand in front of me, next to your brand new Porsche outside, and tell me to let it go. My mother started crying, burying her face in her hands. We tried to give you both what you needed. Caleb was on a specific path. We had to protect his future. He was going to carry the family name, and look exactly where that path led him, I said, pointing a finger toward the ceiling. You pushed him so incredibly hard to be perfect, to be your shiny trophy, that he cracked in half. This isn't a minor medical setback, Richard. This is the direct result of your toxic parenting. My father slammed his glass down on the coffee table. Water splashed over the rim. We gave him everything. We gave him a massive inheritance advance, a trust fund, a debt-free education. And you walked away from this family. You abandoned us. Maybe if you had been a supportive, present brother, he wouldn't have felt so much pressure. Maybe if you answered your phone over the last few years, he wouldn't be upstairs shooting poison into his veins. I stared at him. I actually let out a dark, humorless laugh. It was a masterclass in gaslighting. They were actually trying to blame me, the son they threw away, for the destruction of their golden boy. You are delusional, I said, shaking my head in pure disgust. I turned my back on them and walked toward the staircase. I am going upstairs. If either of you follows me, I walk out the front door and you never see me again. I didn't wait for a response. I put my foot on the bottom step and began to climb. I walked up the wooden stairs. Each step creaked beneath my boots, a hauntingly familiar sound from a childhood I had spent years trying to forget. The hallway on the 2nd floor was dim, the shades drawn tight against the afternoon sun. I reached the end of the hall. The door to the master bedroom, Caleb's massive room, was closed tight. I knocked twice. It was a sharp, authoritative rap on the wood. No answer. I knocked harder, the sound echoing down the empty hall. Go away! A raspy, angry voice yelled from inside. It sounded like tearing sandpaper. It didn't even sound like Caleb. Caleb, it is Joshua. Open the door. Total silence fell over the room. I could hear the faint hum of a television left on mute. Then the slow, shuffling sound of feet dragging across the carpet. The deadbolt clicked. The door opened slowly, revealing a gap of just a few inches. A pale, sunken face peered out from the darkness of the room. I almost recoiled. Dark, bruised circles hung heavy under his eyes. His skin had a sickly, grayish pallor. His hair, usually styled perfectly with expensive pomade, was greasy and matted to his forehead. He was wearing a stained gray hoodie. He had lost at least 30, maybe 40 pounds. His collarbones jutted out sharply against the fabric. The golden child, the pride of the Kastner legacy, looked like a walking ghost. He stared at me, his eyes wide and bloodshot, struggling to process that I was actually standing there. Slowly, he unhooked the security chain and opened the door wider, stepping back to let me in. The smell hit me the second I crossed the threshold. It was a visceral punch to the gut. A foul mixture of stale sweat, rotting fast food containers, unwashed laundry, and a faint, chemical metallic odor. The heavy blackout curtains were drawn shut, plunging the large room into perpetual twilight. Clothes were piled in chaotic mounds on the expensive Pottery Barn rug. On his massive custom oak desk, scattered among old college textbooks, I saw a terrifying sight. Half a dozen empty orange pill bottles, a dirty spoon, and a lighter. Caleb walked back to his unmade bed and sat heavily on the edge, resting his elbows on his knees and rubbing his face with shaking hands. He wouldn't look at me directly. "They called you," he mumbled, his voice flat and devoid of life. "Yeah, Mom begged," I said, staying near the door, my arms crossed. I didn't want to touch anything in the room. Caleb let out a terrible, broken laugh. "To fix me? The massive disappointment comes back to save the shining star. It's poetic, really. I bet Dad hates that you're the one seeing me like this." "I am not here to fix you, Caleb," I said firmly. "I am not a doctor. I am here to see if you actually want to be fixed, or if you're just going to lay down and let this kill you." Caleb put his head down between his knees. Slowly, his shoulders began to shake. Deep, ugly, agonizing sobs tore from his chest. It was the sound of a man who had completely shattered. I did not move to comfort him. I didn't put a hand on his shoulder. I just stood there in the darkness, watching the total collapse of the boy who had been handed the world. "I can't stop Josh," he whispered between ragged sobs. "The pills, the oxy, they make it quiet. You have no idea. You don't know how loud it is in my head. Every single day of my life. Be the best, Caleb. Don't fail, Caleb. Make us proud, Caleb." It was a cage. A beautiful, perfect, gold-plated cage. Every A- felt like a failure. Every mistake felt like a crime. When I got into that car crash, when I took that first pill the doctor gave me, the voices in my head just stopped. The pressure vanished. I could finally breathe. "So you let the quiet destroy you," I said softly. Caleb looked up, wiping his nose with the sleeve of his dirty hoodie. "You got out. You were so lucky, Josh. You got to be a failure in their eyes early on. You had zero expectations placed on you. You were invisible, yeah, but you were free to just exist. I had to carry the entire family's legacy on my back. If I fell, if I proved I wasn't perfect, the whole house burned down. And now I'm exactly what they always feared I would be." For the first time in 7 years, I felt a sudden, sharp pang of sympathy for my brother. The anger that had fueled me for nearly a decade began to thaw. We were both victims of the exact same toxic system, just fighting on different fronts. My parents neglected me, starving me of affection, but they had suffocated him with conditional love. They loved the idea of Caleb, the trophies he brought home, not the human being he actually was. "I tried to find you, you know," Caleb said, his voice dropping to a raw whisper. He looked at the floor. 2 years ago, when it first started getting bad, before they fired me from the consulting firm, I knew I was slipping. I knew I couldn't stop taking them. I couldn't tell Mom and Dad. They would have just yelled at me for ruining their image. I needed you. I tried to email you. I frowned, my brow furrowing in confusion. "I never changed my email address, Caleb. I've had the same Gmail account since high school. I never got anything from you." Caleb shook his head. He reached under his greasy pillow and pulled out a phone with a shattered screen. His hands trembled violently as he unlocked it and opened his email app. He scrolled through his sent folder for a few moments, his thumb slipping on the glass, before turning the screen toward me. There it was. An email dated September 14th, 2023. 2 full years ago. Subject: "I need help." Message: "Josh, I know I was a coward at your graduation. I know I didn't defend you, and I know you probably hate me. But I am drowning. I am taking things and I can't stop. I can't tell them. Please, if you see this, just call me. I need my brother." My chest physically ached reading the words. It was a desperate cry for a lifeline. "Caleb," I said gently, "what email address did you send this to?" "Yours. The one saved in my phone contacts," he mumbled. I looked closely at the to field on the cracked screen. The email address read, joshuakastner98@gmail.com. My actual email address, the one I had always used, was chkastner98@gmail.com. Caleb? I said, a cold dread pooling in my stomach. This is the wrong email address. It bounced back. Or it went to a dead inbox. He frowned, his drug-addled brain struggling to process the information. No, it's not. That is the contact card I've had saved in my phone for you since we were teenagers. I just typed Josh and clicked your name. It auto-filled. I took the phone from his shaking hands. I tapped on my contact card in his address book. I scrolled down to the bottom of the screen, looking at the metadata of the contact file. I checked the last edited history. My blood turned to absolute ice. The air in the room seemed to freeze. The contact card for my name had been manually edited on June 12, 2023, just 3 months before Caleb sent his desperate plea for help. Caleb? I said, my voice barely a whisper, completely devoid of emotion. This contact was manually edited in June of 2023. The email was changed. Did you do this? What? No, Caleb said, shaking his head slowly. I didn't touch it. Why would I change your email to a fake one? He stared at me, his hollow eyes blinking slowly as the gears in his mind turned. Then the realization dawned on him, hitting him like a physical blow. The color drained completely from his already pale face. Mom, Caleb whispered, his voice cracking with horror. Mom took my phone that month. I came over for Sunday dinner. She took it to the Apple store in the mall. She said she was backing up our family iCloud plan data because my storage was full. I stared at the glowing screen of the shattered phone. The absolute truth of the situation hit me, devastating and clear. My parents knew. They knew back in 2023 that Caleb was slipping. They saw the signs. And they knew that if Caleb reached rock bottom, the only person outside of their toxic control who might actually tell him the truth, the only person who might help him without worrying about the family's public image, was me. So my mother went into his phone. She intentionally sabotaged his contact list. She deliberately altered my email address by a few letters, knowing it would look correct at a glance, to ensure that if her golden child ever tried to cry out for help, his cries would bounce back into the void. They isolated an addict. They cut off his only potential lifeline to protect their perfect, flawless reputation. They chose their pride over his survival. My hands began to shake. It wasn't fear. It was a rage so pure, so hot, and so righteous that it burned my throat. It was the kind of anger that makes you see with terrifying clarity. I looked at Caleb. He was weeping silently, curled in on himself like a beaten dog, realizing that the people who demanded his perfection had actively trapped him in his sickness. Get your shoes on, I commanded. Caleb looked up, startled. What? Where are we going? I am getting you out of this house. Today, I said, grabbing his dirty hoodie from a chair and throwing it at him. Pack one bag with clothes. Do it now. I gripped his shattered phone in my right hand, my knuckles white. I turned around and walked out of the dark, suffocating room. I marched down the hallway. I didn't walk down the stairs. I stomped down them, every step hitting the hardwood like the strike of a hammer. I was ready to tear the house down to its foundations. I reached the bottom of the staircase and marched straight into the formal living room. My parents were sitting exactly where I had left them. My mother was nervously dabbing her eyes with a tissue, and my father was scrolling through his phone, likely checking stock prices or sending an email to a client, completely detached from the reality of the nightmare unfolding above his head. They looked up as I entered the room. They expected to see a defeated son. They expected me to ask them what the next steps were. Instead, I raised Caleb's shattered iPhone and threw it violently across the room. It landed on the center of the heavy glass coffee table with a loud, sharp crack, sliding to a halt directly in front of my father's glass of sparkling water. My mother shrieked, jumping back on the sofa. Joshua, have you lost your mind? What is wrong with you? June 12, 2023. I barked. My voice didn't shake. It was a booming, authoritative roar that filled every corner of their perfect house. I pointed a rigid finger directly at my mother's face. You took his phone. You logged into his contacts and you altered my email address. You purposefully changed a single letter so that his cries for help would go straight into the void. My father's head snapped up. The arrogant, lawyer-like mask he wore instantly dissolved, revealing the panicked coward underneath. The color drained from his face, leaving him ashen. My mother froze, the crumpled tissue halfway to her face, her eyes wide with sheer terror. The silence in the room was deafening. The ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway sounded like a bomb counting down. You knew, I continued, taking a slow, menacing step toward them. The anger radiated off me in waves. You knew over 2 years ago that he was falling apart. You saw him cracking under the absurd weight of your expectations. And instead of getting your son real medical help, instead of letting him talk to his own brother, you locked him in a tower. You sabotaged his phone to isolate him, to ensure he couldn't tell me what a disaster your perfect family had become. You let him turn into a junkie, shooting up in the room you bought him, just so the neighbors at the country club wouldn't have anything to gossip about. Joshua, please, my mother wailed, finally finding her voice. She stood up, her hands trembling. You don't understand. We were trying to protect him from you. We didn't want him to feel worse about himself by dragging you into his mess. We panicked. Do not lie to me, I roared back, slamming my hand down on the edge of the sofa. You were protecting yourselves. You knew I would see through the bullshit. You knew I would put him in rehab 2 years ago, and that would have ruined your precious image. You didn't care if he died, as long as he died quietly in his room. My father shot up from his chair, his fists clenched at his sides. He tried to reclaim his authority, puffing out his chest. Now you listen to me, Joshua. This is my house. You will not come in here and speak to your mother that way. You hate this family. You would have used his weakness to humiliate us. I don't give a damn about humiliating you, Richard. You do a fine job of that yourselves, I yelled, stepping into his personal space, forcing him to look up at me. I was taller than him now. You are losing custody of his recovery right here, right now. I am taking over. I reached into the inside pocket of my jacket and pulled out a thick manila folder I had meticulously prepared the night before. I slapped it down onto the glass table right next to the cracked phone. This is Serenity Ridge, I stated, my voice dropping back to that terrifying, clinical calm. It is a highly respected, evidence-based inpatient rehabilitation center located in upstate New York. It requires a mandatory 90-day residential stay. It includes medical detox, intensive trauma therapy, and psychiatric care. I called them yesterday. They have a bed ready for him at intake today. My father glanced down at the glossy brochure sticking out of the folder. He adjusted his collar, trying to regain his composure. Fine, we can look into it. I will have my assistant call the facility directors on Monday to discuss their success rates and set up a visitation schedule for us. You are not listening to me, I said. There is no we. I am taking him there right now. His bag is packed. And here is the rest of the deal. The program costs exactly $28,500. You are paying for it in full right now by direct wire transfer. My father scoffed, crossing his arms. The arrogance flared up again. I am absolutely not writing a check that large without thoroughly vetting the facility and ensuring we have full access to his doctors. It's our money. It's the money you saved by refusing to pay for my college education, I countered instantly. And you have zero rights here. You sign the check and you stay away. You do not get to visit. You do not get to call. You stay out of his life for the next 90 days so he can figure out who he is without your poison. You can't dictate those terms to us, my mother cried, stepping toward me. We are his parents. We love him. I turned to her, my eyes cold and dead. If you do not pay for this today, right now, while I stand here, I will put him in my car and drive him to a state-funded facility. And then, I will personally call every single person you know. I will call your golf buddies. I will call the parents at the elementary school you run. I will call the partners at your accounting firm. I will tell all of them exactly why the Golden Kastner boy is a homeless addict, and I will tell them exactly how you edited his phone to trap him in it." I looked back at my father, locking eyes with him. He saw the absolute lack of bluff in my stare. The scared 20-year-old kid from the graduation was dead and buried. I was holding all the leverage, and I was entirely prepared to burn his reputation to ash. "You are either paying for his rehab today," I said slowly, emphasizing every word, "or you are paying for his funeral next month. Make a choice, Richard." My father's shoulders slumped. The fight completely drained out of him. He looked old, defeated, and exposed. He reached into his pocket, pulled out his own phone, and opened his banking app with trembling fingers. "Give me the routing number," he muttered through gritted teeth, unable to look me in the eye. I opened the folder, pointing to the highlighted banking details. I stood over him, watching the screen of his phone like a hawk as he typed in the numbers and authorized the $28,500 wire transfer. Once the confirmation screen popped up with a green checkmark, I nodded. At that moment, I heard the slow, heavy thud of footsteps on the stairs. Caleb walked down into the foyer. He was carrying a single, beat-up duffel bag. He looked fragile, like a strong breeze could knock him over, but he was moving. He didn't look at the mantel with his photos. He didn't look at my parents. He kept his eyes fixed on the front door. My mother rushed forward, tears streaming down her face, reaching her arms out for him. "Caleb, honey, please, we love you so much. We will be right here waiting for you when you get back. We're a family." Caleb flinched violently away from her touch, sidestepping her hands as if they were made of fire. He looked over at me, his eyes wide and scared, but trusting. "Let's go, Josh," he whispered. I walked past my parents without another word. I opened the heavy oak front door and stepped out into the crisp, biting February air. I did not look back at the perfect white house with the black shutters. I did not look back at the brand new Porsche in the driveway. I did not look back at the two people standing in the foyer, finally reaping the harvest of the seeds they had planted. I walked to my Honda Civic, popped the trunk, and threw Caleb's bag inside. Caleb slid into the passenger seat, pulling his hood up over his head. I got into the driver's seat, started the engine, and pulled away from the curb. As we drove out of Newton, leaving the lies and the wreckage behind us, Caleb rested his head against the cold glass of the window. "Thank you," he whispered softly. I put the car in drive, keeping my eyes on the road ahead. The storm that had raged for 7 years was finally over. We were battered, we were scarred, but for the first time in my life I was holding the wheel, and I was driving us both toward the dawn. The drive from Newton, Massachusetts to Serenity Ridge in upstate New York was supposed to take exactly 3 hours and 45 minutes. It ended up feeling like an entire lifetime. For the first hour, neither of us spoke a single word. The silence in my Honda Civic was heavy, thick with the weight of 7 years of estrangement and the raw, jagged reality of what had just happened in our parents' living room. I kept my eyes fixed on the highway, the gray winter landscape blurring past the windows. I gripped the steering wheel until my hands ached, my adrenaline slowly crashing, leaving behind a deep, hollow exhaustion. I glanced over at Caleb. He had pulled his knees up to his chest, resting his forehead against the cold passenger window. His eyes were closed, but his breathing was shallow and uneven. The physical reality of his addiction was already starting to set in. Without his pills, his body was panicking. He was shivering, despite the car heater blasting warm air directly at him. His skin had a terrifying, translucent quality to it. We crossed the state line into New York. The highway opened up, winding through dense, snow-covered pine forests. I needed gas, and I needed coffee to keep my hands from shaking. I pulled off at a small, isolated rest stop. I parked the car and turned off the engine. Caleb didn't move. "I am going to grab some coffee and fill the tank," I said, my voice sounding unnaturally loud in the quiet car. "Do you want anything? Water? Something to eat?" Caleb slowly shook his head, keeping his eyes squeezed shut. "No, I feel sick. My stomach is in knots, Josh." I nodded, stepping out into the biting cold. When I came back 5 minutes later with 2 bottles of water and a black coffee, Caleb was sitting up. He was staring at his hands, rubbing his palms together furiously as if trying to scrape off a layer of dirt. I handed him a bottle of water. He took it with trembling fingers. He took a small sip and then looked over at me. His eyes were red, completely stripped of the arrogant confidence he used to wear like armor when we were kids. "Can I ask you something?" Caleb asked. His voice was raspy, barely above a whisper. "Yeah, ask." "Do you hate me?" I stopped with my coffee cup halfway to my mouth. I looked out the windshield at the empty highway. I thought about the 52 times my parents had asked why I couldn't be more like him. I thought about the laughter in the auditorium. I thought about the crushing debt of my student loans while he lived completely debt-free on the massive college fund they built just for him. I took a deep breath. "I did," I answered honestly. "I hated you for a very long time, Caleb. I hated that you stood on that stage and laughed with them. I hated that you got everything while I got nothing. I hated that you never once stood up for me." Caleb squeezed his eyes shut. A single tear escaped, cutting a track through the grime on his cheek. "I deserve that. I was a coward. But I don't hate you anymore," I continued, turning to look directly at him. "I haven't hated you for a while. Therapy helped me see the truth. We were both their victims. We were just trapped in completely different cages." Caleb looked at me, his brow furrowed in confusion. "What do you mean?" "My cage was neglect," I explained calmly. "They starved me of affection, of resources, of basic human dignity. They told the world I was useless, so I had to spend my entire adult life working myself to the bone just to prove I had a right to exist. But your cage? Your cage was pressure. They bought you with that college fund. They bought you with the promise of a massive inheritance. They dressed you up in expensive suits, they paid for your luxury apartments, and in return they demanded absolute perfection. You weren't a son to them, Caleb. You were an investment. And the moment their investment started failing, the moment you showed a single crack, they panicked and locked you away. They isolated you to protect their portfolio." Caleb stared at me, his chest heaving. The realization hit him hard, breaking through the fog of his withdrawal. "They loved the trophy," he whispered, his voice cracking. "They didn't love me." "No," I said softly. "They didn't. They don't know how to love anyone but themselves. And that is why we have to cut them off. Both of us." Caleb nodded slowly. He took another sip of water, his hands shaking a little less. "I am terrified, Josh. I don't know how to live without the pills. I don't know who I am if I'm not the perfect Kastner boy." "You are about to find out," I said, putting the car back in drive. "And for what it's worth, I think whoever you really are is going to be a lot better than the fake version they created." We drove the rest of the way in a comfortable, understanding silence. We arrived at Serenity Ridge at exactly 10:45 a.m. The facility did not look like a hospital. It looked like a massive, rustic lodge nestled deep in the Berkshire Mountains. The air was incredibly crisp and clean. We walked through the heavy wooden double doors into the reception area. It was warm, featuring exposed wooden beams and a large stone fireplace. A woman in her late 40s with kind eyes and a warm smile walked out from behind the front desk. Her name tag read Diane, the intake coordinator I had spoken to on the phone. "You must be Joshua and Caleb," Diane said gently, extending her hand. "We have been expecting you. Welcome to Serenity Ridge." The next 2 hours were a blur of clinical efficiency and emotional exhaustion. We sat in a private office while Diane walked Caleb through the intake paperwork, the medical history forms, and the strict rules of the facility. I handed over the confirmation of the $28,500 wire transfer. My father's money was finally doing something useful. When it was time for Caleb to go back to the medical wing for his initial detox assessment, Diane stood up and gave us a moment alone. Caleb picked up his duffel bag. He looked absolutely terrified, like a child being dropped off at a strange school. He looked at me, shifting his weight from foot to foot. Then, for the first time in 7 years, my older brother stepped forward and wrapped his arms around me. It was an awkward hug at first, stiff and hesitant. But then he squeezed me tight, burying his face in my shoulder. He felt so fragile, so incredibly thin. I hugged him back, wrapping my arms around his shoulders, holding him steady. "You have got this," I said firmly into his ear. "Do the work. Don't hide. Be honest with the doctors and be honest with yourself. I am right here. Thank you for coming back," Caleb whispered, his voice thick with tears. "Thank you for not letting me die in that room. I will see you on the other side," I said, stepping back and giving him a firm nod. I watched him turn and walk through the secure double doors with Diane. The doors clicked shut behind him. He was gone. He was safe. I walked out of the facility, the cold mountain air hitting my face. I walked across the gravel parking lot, unlocked my car, and sat in the driver's seat. I closed the door, sealing myself in the quiet interior of my Honda. I put my hands on the steering wheel. I took a deep breath, and then I broke down. I cried. I cried harder than I had cried in my entire life. But it was not from sadness. It was a massive, seismic release of tension. The dam I had built inside my chest 7 years ago finally shattered. I cried for the 20-year-old kid sitting in the auditorium. I cried for the years I spent starving and working 3 jobs. I cried for the brother I had lost and the brother I had just found again. I had faced the monsters of my childhood. I had walked straight into their trap, and I had completely dismantled their power. I was safe. I was finally truly safe. The next 90 days changed the entire trajectory of my life and Caleb's. I drove back to Cambridge and threw myself back into my routine. My life at the hospital was thriving. My salary was secure, my apartment was warm, and my friends Gabrielle and Amit were a constant source of support. But there was a new element to my routine now. Every Wednesday afternoon, I had a scheduled phone call with Diane and Caleb's primary therapist, Dr. Evans, for an update on his progress. The first 2 weeks were brutal. Caleb went through a severe medical detox. The withdrawal symptoms ravaged his body. He was angry, he was sick, and he wanted to quit. Dr. Evans told me that Caleb had packed his bag 3 times, demanding to leave. But by week 4, the fog began to lift. The chemicals left his brain, and the real, agonizing psychological work began. Caleb had signed a strict release form that explicitly barred our parents from receiving any medical updates, visiting, or contacting the facility. He gave full medical proxy and communication rights to me. When my father inevitably tried to have his high-priced corporate lawyer call Serenity Ridge to demand a progress report on his investment, the facility legally shut him down. They hit a brick wall. For the first time in their lives, Richard and Diane Kastner had zero control. During week 5, Caleb and I had our first virtual family therapy session. I sat at my kitchen counter with my laptop open. Caleb sat in a small counseling room in New York, with Dr. Evans sitting next to him. He looked entirely different. He had gained 10 pounds back. The grayish tint to his skin was gone, replaced by a healthy, natural color. His eyes were clear, sharp, and focused. He looked like my brother again, but an older, sadder, wiser version. "Joshua," Dr. Evans started, his voice calm and measured. "Caleb has been doing some intense work unpacking the family dynamic you two grew up in. He wanted to share some of his realizations with you today." Caleb leaned forward, looking directly into the camera lens. "Josh, I have spent the last month talking about the pressure. I always thought Mom and Dad loved me more because I was better, because I got the grades and the trophies. But I realize now it wasn't love. It was a transaction. They deposited money into my college fund. They deposited praise, and I owed them perfection. The second I couldn't pay them back with a perfect image, they canceled my account." I nodded slowly, listening intently. "I was so terrified of losing their approval," Caleb continued, his voice steady but full of emotion. "Because if I wasn't the golden child, then I was nothing. I saw how they treated you. I saw them act like you didn't exist just because you weren't a shiny trophy. I was terrified that if I failed, they would do the exact same thing to me. So I stayed quiet. I let them abuse you. I let them humiliate you at your graduation because I was too much of a coward to risk my own position. I traded my little brother for a trust fund and an inheritance. And it is the biggest regret of my entire life. I am so deeply, deeply sorry. I stared at the screen. The sincerity in his voice was absolute. This wasn't the fake, defensive apology my parents offered. This was a man taking full, devastating accountability for his actions. "I forgive you, Caleb," I said. And as the words left my mouth, I realized they were completely true. The heavy, dark weight I had carried for him vanished. "You were a kid navigating a war zone just like I was. You chose the shield they handed you. I don't blame you for trying to survive. But we are adults now. We don't have to play their game anymore." We both cried during that session. We cried through the screen, separated by hundreds of miles, but closer than we had ever been in the same house. Progress was not linear. There were hard weeks. There were weeks where Caleb struggled with intense cravings, weeks where the shame of losing his career and his apartment threatened to pull him under. But he stayed. He did the grueling work. He went to group therapy, he journaled, he faced the demons our parents had planted in his head. In May 2025, exactly 90 days after I dropped him off, Caleb completed the residential program. I drove back up to the Berkshire Mountains to pick him up. When he walked out of the double wooden doors of the facility, he looked like a new man. He was wearing jeans and a simple t-shirt. He had put on a solid 20 pounds of healthy weight. He looked strong. He looked awake. He dropped his bag and wrapped me in a massive, crushing hug. "Thank you for not giving up on me," he said, his voice full of profound gratitude. "I didn't do the work, man," I replied, clapping him on the back. "You saved yourself. I just gave you the ride." The ride back to Massachusetts felt completely different from the ride up. The windows were rolled down, letting in the warm spring breeze. We listened to music. We actually laughed. We talked about normal things. We talked about my recent promotion at the hospital. We talked about his plans for the future. Caleb did not move back into the perfect house with the black shutters. He made a massive, life-altering decision. With the help of Dr. Evans, Caleb secured a spot in a sober living community house in Springfield, Massachusetts. It was a modest, slightly run-down house he shared with 4 other recovering addicts. His rent was $850 a month. When our parents found out he was moving into a shared house instead of coming back to Newton or moving back into a luxury apartment, they lost their minds. My father sent Caleb a furious email, threatening to completely cut him out of the family inheritance and freeze his trust fund if he didn't return home and resume his corporate career path immediately. They wanted the golden boy back on display. They couldn't stand the idea of their son living in a working-class neighborhood with other addicts. Caleb sat in my apartment, reading the email aloud to me. He looked at the screen for a long time. Then he hit reply. He typed 2 sentences. "Keep the inheritance. I am keeping my life." Then, he blocked both of their email addresses and changed his phone number, just like I had done 7 years prior. Caleb got a job working at a local independent bookstore in Springfield. He made $15 an hour. He spent his days organizing shelves, recommending novels to customers, and going to Alcoholics Anonymous meetings every single night. For a guy who used to make a massive corporate salary, it was a massive step down on paper. But watching him, I had never seen him happier. I drove out to Springfield to visit him once a month. We would grab cheap sandwiches from a deli down the street and sit in the park. He would tell me about the books he was reading. I would tell him about my clinical trials. We were carefully, deliberately rebuilding our relationship. We were learning how to be brothers for the very first time. We were learning how to trust each other without the toxic shadow of our parents hanging over us. In October 2025, my phone buzzed while I was sitting at my desk at the hospital. It was a text from Caleb. 6 months sober today. Feels weird to celebrate something so basic like just functioning. But I am proud. I smiled, my chest swelling with genuine pride. I typed back immediately. "It is not basic. It is everything. I am incredibly proud of you. You fought for this." He replied a minute later. "I couldn't have done it without you kicking the door down, Josh. Thank you." I looked at the text. I realized then that the angry, terrified kid who ran away from the graduation auditorium was finally at peace. I had gone back into the fire and I had pulled my brother out. The family they tried to destroy had survived. It just looked different now. It is now December 2025. I am sitting in my apartment in Cambridge. The snow is falling softly outside my window, coating the city in a quiet, peaceful white. My life is beautifully, wonderfully ordinary. I still work as a senior clinical research coordinator at Massachusetts General Hospital. I love my job. I love the science, the routine, and the fact that I earned every single promotion through my own sweat and dedication. I am still close with Sarah, Dev, Monica, and James from the hospital. Gabrielle and Amit are coming over this weekend for our annual cheap wine and takeout holiday party. I even grabbed coffee with Ethan, my ex-boyfriend, a few weeks ago. We aren't getting back together, the timing isn't right, but we are good friends. He told me I looked lighter. He said the wall I used to keep up seemed to have finally crumbled. He was right. Caleb is currently 10 months sober. He is still working at the bookstore, but he recently enrolled in the local community college part-time. He is taking introductory classes for a psychology major. He wants to become an addiction counselor. He wants to help kids who are buckling under the weight of impossible expectations. He is stable, he is hopeful, and he is a genuinely good man. We talk on the phone twice a week. We are brothers. Real brothers. As for Richard and Diane Kastner, last week, I checked my mail downstairs. Mixed in with the bills and the junk flyers was a thick, expensive-looking envelope with a return address from Newton, Massachusetts. The handwriting was my mother's flawless cursive. It was a Christmas card. A few years ago, seeing that handwriting would have sent me into a spiral of anxiety. I would have agonized over whether to open it, wondering if it contained an apology, a check, or a new manipulation tactic. This time, I didn't even break my stride. I walked right past my apartment door, stepped up to the communal recycling bin in the hallway, and dropped the unopened envelope inside. It landed with a soft thud among the old newspapers. Our relationship status is permanently severed. There is zero contact. They do not have my new email. They do not have Caleb's phone number. They are living alone in their massive, perfect house with their black shutters and their brand new Porsche in the driveway. They have all the money, the country club memberships, and the pristine reputation they always cared about more than us. But they have no sons. They traded their children for an image, and now they have to live in the empty museum they built. People at work who know fragments of my story sometimes ask me if I regret it. They ask if I regret going back that day in February. They ask if I should have just left Caleb to hit rock bottom on his own, to spare myself the emotional trauma of facing my abusers. They ask if I will ever forgive my parents for the sake of family peace. The answer is no. I do not regret going back, because I didn't go back for my parents. I went back to rescue another victim of their abuse. In saving Caleb, I proved the ultimate truth to myself. I could stand in the very room where they tried to break me, look them directly in the eye, and not fall apart. I took their power away. I didn't need their college fund, their inheritance, or their approval. I had built my own armor. Here is what I have learned through all the therapy, the tears, and the long nights. Healing does not require reconciliation. Society tells us that family is everything, that blood is thicker than water, and that we must always forgive our parents because they did their best. But sometimes their best is toxic. Sometimes their best is a poison that will slowly kill you. Setting ironclad boundaries is not an act of cruelty. It is a fundamental act of survival. You do not owe your peace of mind to the people who consistently destroy it, even if they share your DNA. You do not owe your abusers a seat at the table you built with your own two hands. Love should never be a transaction. Love should never be conditional on your perfection. If you are listening to this story right now, and you have ever felt like the useless one, the forgotten one, the child who was never quite good enough no matter how hard you tried to twist yourself into their mold, I need you to hear me clearly. You are not broken. You are not a disappointment. The flaw was never in you. The flaw was in their inability to love you for who you are. You have the absolute right to walk away. You have the right to build a chosen family who celebrates your existence instead of tolerating it. You have the right to protect your peace at all costs. You are not useless. You never were. What is the biggest lesson you took away from my story? Is it the power of walking away, the reality of toxic family dynamics, or the importance of protecting your own mental health? I want to hear your thoughts. Please, leave your favorite lesson down in the comments below. Let's start a conversation. Or, if this story just gave you a sense of validation and peace, simply comment the word good so I know you are out there, and I know you understand. Your support means the world to me. If you believe in breaking generational cycles and setting healthy boundaries, please hit the like button and subscribe. Let's keep building a community of people who refuse to stay in the cages they were handed. My name is Joshua Kastner. I am 27 years old. I survived the fire, I saved my brother, and I am entirely, wonderfully free.